The galaxy was silent. Across endless stars, in secret chambers and hidden meeting halls, the most powerful alien leaders gathered together. Their voices were low, their movements tense. They were not speaking about trade. They were not speaking about politics. They were whispering about only one thing: humanity. It began like a rumor. At first, no one believed it. Humans were too new, too young, too small to matter. They came from one single world, a world most species had never even bothered to mark on their star maps. To the great empires of the galaxy, humanity was nothing. But then the battle started. The first reports were dismissed. One fleet destroyed. Impossible. A scouting mission wiped out. A mistake. Perhaps the commanders were weak. Perhaps the troops were poorly trained. The galaxy turned its head and moved on. But the whispers never stopped. They grew louder, darker, more frightening. In the shadowed chamber of the Zilrith Dominion, 12 alien warlords sat in silence. Their eyes, glowing like molten stones, watched one another with fear. These were rulers who had fought wars for centuries. They had crushed rebellions, enslaved planets, and turned civilizations into ash. Yet tonight, they were afraid. They fight like no other. One of the warlords hissed, his voice sharp as broken glass. You cannot break them. You cannot frighten them. They keep coming, even when fire burns their flesh. Another leaned forward, his tendrils quivering. I saw the reports. I saw the footage. A human soldier dragged himself through fire, his armor gone, his body broken. Still, he fought. Still, he killed. What creature does this? What mind refuses to die? The chamber fell quiet again. Even the walls seemed to listen. In another corner of the galaxy, the Council of Elders of the Vyari race met in their crystal halls. The Vyari were a proud ancient people, their cities rising high like towers of light. They had seen wars before, but this time, they trembled. One elder whispered, "It is not their weapons. Their ships are weak compared to ours. Their technology is still young, but it is their spirit, it is their fury. When they fight, it is as if death itself fears them." The other elders nodded, their glowing eyes dim with worry. The war it's supposed to be short, it was supposed to be simple. But now the stars carry only one story, that humans cannot be stopped. Across the galaxy, in shadowed taverns and hidden corners of spaceports, the whispers spread among ordinary travelers. Pilots, merchants, smugglers, all telling the same tales. They burn like fire. They don't surrender. They fight until the last breath. Every story was different, but every story carried the same message. Humanity was not like the others. The galaxy had seen savagery before. It had seen cruelty. Empires had risen and fallen in blood. But this was something else. Humanity did not fight like conquerors. They did not fight like slaves. They fought like survivors. They fought as if the universe itself was against them, and they refused to bow. One merchant swore he saw a single human ship hold off a fleet until it burned into nothing. Another claimed a human soldier stood against an entire alien squad, his body riddled with wounds, but still refusing to fall. Perhaps the stories were exaggerated, perhaps not. But the effect was the same: fear. The fear grew. It slipped into every council, every empire, every corner of the stars. No one wanted to face them. No one wanted to fight them. And yet, the war was already spreading. In the deepest reaches of space, in a council chamber hidden behind layers of steel and shadow, the rulers of 5 powerful empires sat together. Enemies, rivals, and conquerors, but tonight they were allies, bound by one shared terror. One ruler slammed his fist against the table. They are only human. They come from a single world. How can they stand against us all? Another ruler answered, his voice shaking, because they are not fighting for conquest, they are fighting to survive, and a species that fights to survive will burn the stars before it bows. The chamber went silent. No one spoke again. Somewhere in the dark void of space, the whispers spread again, carried on trembling voices and frightened hearts. Every time, the words grew sharper, clearer, more certain. The war was so savage. The galaxy whispers humanity's name in terror. The smoke of war rose high into the sky, turning the sun into a pale red ghost. The ground shook with the sound of engines, metal boots, and marching ranks. Thousands of alien soldiers moved in perfect lines, their armor shining, their banners waving. They were confident. They had come for conquest. To them this was nothing more than a routine campaign. The commanders told their troops that humans were weak, that humans were fragile, that this war would be quick, simple, and final. They said Earth was just one world, a single stone in an ocean of stars. A single stone could not resist the tide. So the aliens marched forward. Their machines rolled across hills. Their walkers thundered down valleys. Their ships blotted out the sky. In their minds, victory was already written, but then the silence broke. From the ruins of a shattered city, the first human strike came. It was not a formal attack. It was not neat or organized. It was sudden, wild, and filled with fire. Explosions tore through the alien formation. Tanks erupted into flames. Soldiers fell screaming as hidden charges ripped through their lines. Panic spread faster than orders. The perfect formation broke. The shining lines collapsed into chaos. And then the humans came. They did not march in neat rows. They did not wait for orders to echo through command chains. They appeared like shadows, fast and merciless. Some burst from underground tunnels, covered in ash and dust. Others leaped from broken rooftops, firing weapons into the stunned enemy. A few had no weapons at all, only knives, clubs, or their bare hands. But still they charged. Still they fought. Alien soldiers fired back, their plasma bolts searing through walls and flesh. But the humans did not stop even when shot, even when burned. They dragged themselves forward. One human, his arm missing, carried explosives in his other hand. He hurled himself into an alien tank, and both vanished in a single ball of fire. For the aliens, this was no battle. It was a nightmare. Their commanders shouted for them to hold the line, to push forward, to crush the defenders. But the humans were not defenders. They were hunters. They knew every street, every ruin, every shadow. They fought with a savagery the galaxy had never seen. The first hours became rivers of blood. Alien bodies lay scattered among broken steel. Machines smoldered in black smoke. The air was filled with the smell of burning metal and flesh, and the humans kept coming. Every time an alien thought victory was at hand, a human appeared. Every time they thought the line would break, another strike tore through their side. The humans fought like creatures who had already lost everything, who had nothing left but the fight itself. One alien officer recorded the scene in horror. His words, later whispered across star systems, told of a soldier with half his body burned away, crawling through fire with a rifle still clutched in his hands. He killed 3 more before he finally fell. The officer's voice shook as he ended his report. These are not soldiers. These are demons wearing flesh. Hours turned into a day. The alien army that had landed with pride and confidence now staggered in confusion. Their numbers were greater. Their technology was stronger, but their spirit was breaking. For every human that fell, another seemed to rise, carrying the fury of the dead. By the end of the first day, the aliens realized a truth they had never imagined. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not bow. When night fell, the battlefield was a graveyard. Fires burned across the ruins. The cries of the dying echoed through the smoke. And yet, in the darkness, human eyes glowed with determination. They had lost cities, they had lost families, but they had not lost the will to fight. The aliens withdrew to regroup, their commanders shaken. They told themselves it was only one battle, only one mistake, but deep in their hearts they knew something terrible had begun. The humans had drawn first blood. The whispers of fear spread faster now. Across starships, across fleets, across empires, the story traveled like fire. On dry grass, entire armies had marched in with victory certain, and yet they had bled. They had been broken, and the galaxy listened. In hidden councils and dark taverns, in great empires and among common travelers, one truth was repeated again and again. The humans were not weak. They were not fragile. They were not breakable. They were something else that the galaxy had always believed. War was about numbers, about weapons, about strength. But the humans had shown another truth. War was about will. War was about fury. War was about refusing to fall, no matter the cost. That night, as the alien survivors licked their wounds and buried their dead, the galaxy took its first deep breath of fear. And far away, in silent chambers lit by cold starlight, the whispers grew. Humanity's name passed from voice to voice, like a shadow creeping through the dark. The war had begun, and the galaxy was already trembling. The war did not stop with the first battle. It spread like fire, moving from one world to another, carried on whispers, reports, and terrified voices. Across the stars, entire fleets were sent to crush the humans. Each time, the same promise was made. This would be the final strike. This would be the end of resistance. And each time, the promise broke. At first, the galaxy could not understand. The alien fleets were vast, filled with powerful weapons, guided by centuries of experience. The humans had none of that. Their ships were old, their armor was fragile, their numbers were few, and yet, Every encounter ended the same way: blood, fire, and fear. A convoy of soldiers once entered Earth's orbit with enough force to turn the planet into ash. They expected to see the humans panic, expected to see them bow. Instead, they found cities already fortified, skies filled with human fighters, and armies waiting in silence. The aliens fired first, raining destruction across the land. But when the smoke cleared, the humans charged out of the ruins like predators awakened from sleep. The reports told of men and women running through the fire, dragging weapons from the hands of their enemies, turning the invaders' own machines against them. Even when surrounded, even when broken, they fought as though surrender had never been a thought. To the galaxy, this was madness. To the humans, this was survival. Again and again, alien commanders underestimated them. Again and again, they paid the price. One fleet claimed victory after wiping out an entire human battalion. They celebrated too early. Before the day ended, human survivors struck from the shadows, tearing apart ships, detonating explosives inside hangars, turning the taste of victory into ash. Those who lived to tell the story swore they could still hear human war cries echoing inside their helmets. The fear grew with every story. Soldiers whispered it in their barracks. Pilots spoke of it in quiet voices before missions. Whole populations began to wonder if humanity was something unnatural, something beyond flesh and bone. A frightened captain once recorded a message to his superiors. His words were shaky, his voice weak. We kill them, and they rise again. We burn their cities, and they crawl out of the ashes. They do not fear death. They embrace it. They drag us down with them into the dark. How can we fight such creatures? The message spread far beyond his command. Soon, even the rulers of mighty empires repeated his words in silence. What terrified them most was not only the savagery of humanity, but the fact that the humans fought without hesitation. Other species planned, calculated, waited for orders. Humans acted. A squad could vanish into the ruins of a city and return hours later with an entire enemy platoon destroyed. A single soldier could slip into an enemy base and cause chaos so complete that fleets were delayed for weeks. It became clear that humans were not simply soldiers. They were survivors, born from a world that had tested them with fire, storms, hunger, and death long before they reached the stars. They did not see war as horror. They saw it as life itself. On distant stations, alien diplomats spoke quietly of the same fear. They admitted to one another what none dared to say in public. If humanity could fight like this with little technology and no empire, what would happen when they grew stronger? What would happen when humanity built fleets as large as theirs, weapons as advanced, armies as countless? The thought was unbearable, and so the whisper spread. Humans cannot be broken. Humans do not surrender. Humans are coming. Entire races began to refuse to join the war. Soldiers deserted before their ships even reached human space. Some empires tried to hide the truth, censoring reports, silencing survivors. But the fear was stronger than any wall of lies. No matter how hard they tried, the stories escaped. The stories lived in the dark corners of the galaxy. Smugglers, traders, and wanderers told tales of humans who fought with nothing but rocks, of humans who crawled out of craters with broken bones and still kept killing. Whether those stories were true or not no longer mattered. Belief had already taken root. The galaxy had seen warlords, conquerors, and monsters before, but never like this. Never a species that seemed to embrace pain as fuel, that turned every loss into another reason to fight. On one battlefield, after 3 days of endless combat, an alien commander stood on a hill of bodies staring down at the humans who still advanced. His forces had numbers, his forces had machines, but he felt no victory in his chest. All he felt was dread. The humans below looked up at him with eyes that seemed to glow in the firelight, and for the first time in his life, he felt hunted. The war was not going as planned. It was not a campaign, it was a storm, and humanity was at the center of it, tearing through every fleet, every army, every empire foolish enough to face them. And somewhere, in the silence between battles, the galaxy began to realize a terrible truth. The humans were not fighting to win, they were fighting to survive. And a species that fights to survive cannot be stopped. The fear deepened. The whispers turned darker. From one corner of the stars to the next, voices spoke in secret, as if afraid the humans might hear them. They spoke of blood. They spoke of fire. They spoke of a war so savage that even the stars themselves seemed to tremble. And always, in the end, they spoke one name: humanity. The galaxy watched from distant stations, from crystal towers, from the cold steel halls of mighty empires. Every eye turned toward the war. At first there had been laughter. When the first rumors spread of human savagery, many dismissed them as exaggerations, tales stretched too far by frightened survivors. But as more fleets returned broken, as more commanders whispered of nightmares made real, the laughter died. In great halls where decisions shaped the stars, rulers gathered. They had expected a swift war, another rebellion crushed, another small species made into servants. Instead, they found themselves facing reports soaked in blood. They watched recordings of humans charging through firestorms, of soldiers fighting even after their bodies were torn apart. They saw cities in ruins where human survivors still crawled from the rubble with weapons in hand. These were not myths anymore. They were facts written in ash. Among the Renari, a species known for cold logic, silence filled their council chamber. They had once mocked humanity, calling them animals wrapped in flesh, but the screens in front of them told a different story. Entire battalions of Renari troops had been lost to small human forces. Advanced machines had been captured, turned against their makers. Worst of all, human eyes stared directly into the cameras before cutting the feed, as if promising that death was on its way. The council could no longer deny it. Fear had reached them too. Ordinary people across the stars began to speak of humans. With trembling voices, on distant colonies, merchants traded not only goods, but stories. They told of human ships appearing out of nowhere, striking with fury and vanishing back into the void. They told of soldiers who fought barehanded, their enemies torn apart by sheer will. They told of voices screaming into the night, echoing across battlefields long after the fighting was over. The galaxy had seen strong armies before. It had seen brutal conquerors who left planets burning behind them. But humans were different. Their cruelty was not conquest. Their savagery was not pride. They fought as though the universe had always tried to kill them, and they had learned, across centuries of storms, hunger, and struggle, to fight back without mercy. In the golden halls of the Vayari, a species older than many empires, the elders debated in fear. They had survived countless wars, but none had felt like this. One elder, his voice shaking, whispered, "We thought them fragile, but fragility hides something greater. It hides fury. It hides the strength to rise again and again. Every scar they carry only makes them stronger. Every loss makes them fiercer." His words settled over the council like smoke. No one dared to answer. Even the soldiers who had never faced humans began to dread the day they might. Training yards once filled with pride, now echoed with unease. Recruits asked their commanders questions in secret. What if we are sent to human space? What if the stories are true? No answer brought comfort. For every tale dismissed, another came forward, sharper, darker, harder to deny. The galaxy began to change. Some empires hesitated to send more troops. Others demanded greater numbers, greater weapons, anything that might crush this rising terror. But deep inside, the leaders knew the truth. Weapons might break bodies, but weapons could not break what lived inside humanity. They could not erase that savage will. On one distant world, an alien broadcast captured what became one of the most feared images of the war. A squad of humans, their armor cracked, their faces burned, stood in the ruins of a captured base. Around them, alien corpses lay scattered. The humans raised their rifles, not in victory, but in defiance. One of them, his voice ragged but clear, spoke into the camera, "We are still here." The broadcast was cut seconds later, but the damage was already done. Across the stars, billions saw it. Billions remembered it. The fear was no longer only with soldiers and rulers. It had seeped into the hearts of ordinary people. Traders, farmers, citizens, they all began to whisper the same thing. If humanity could stand against the greatest armies, then what else were they capable of? If humanity survived this war, what would they become? The thought shook entire civilizations. The galaxy, for all its size, began to feel smaller. Every star, every world, seemed to carry the weight of one single word: humanity. Their name traveled faster than light, faster than fleets, carried on voices that could not stop repeating the stories, and with each telling, the fear grew. No longer was it a question of whether humans could be defeated. The question had changed. Now it was whether the galaxy itself could survive them. The rulers of empires stared into the void with dread. They remembered how the war had begun, with confidence and arrogance, and how quickly it had shifted into fire and blood. They understood now that something new had awakened in the galaxy, something they could not control. The humans had forced them to see war not as they had always known it, but as something raw, something primal, something that lived not in machines, or strategies, but in the very bones of those who refused to die. And, as the stars turned cold above, the galaxy whispered again, soft but certain. The war was so savage that even the heavens themselves seemed to tremble, and everywhere the same truth echoed. Humanity's name was no longer just spoken, it was feared. The galaxy believed it had found the answer. If small fleets and scattered armies failed, then overwhelming force would crush humanity. That was the promise spoken in the high courts of empires, in the command halls of admirals, and in the trembling voices of diplomats who tried to convince themselves that numbers would win where fear had spread. So the greatest fleet the stars had ever seen was gathered. From dozens of systems came ships larger than cities, bristling with weapons enough to scorch planets to ash. Armadas joined together, their banners of war filling the void like endless waves. The combined strength of empires stretched across the horizon of space. It was said that when the fleet assembled, it blocked out the very stars behind it. No resistance could survive such a storm. Humanity would finally be erased. The fleet moved with confidence, its admirals boasting of swift victory. In speeches, broadcast across the galaxy, they promised to crush Earth, to silence the whispers, to end the terror once and for all. Citizens cheered, but deep in their hearts unease lingered. The stories of humanity had spread too far, too deep. When the fleet arrived at the edge of human space, the skies lit up with the fire of thousands of ships. Human defenses were scattered, small, fragile in comparison. Against such power, they should have shattered at once. But instead, the first human transmission came, carried on every channel, a single voice speaking with a calm certainty that cut through the noise. You are not welcome here. You will not leave whole. The battle began. The alien fleet opened fire, entire worlds glowing under the bombardment. Explosions painted the sky with fire. Human ships were torn apart, their hulls cracked open, their crews lost to the void. To any who watched, it seemed like humanity was finally breaking. But then the humans struck back, from hidden stations, buried deep in asteroid fields, from tunnels carved into moons, from ships cloaked in silence. The counterattack came. Human vessels, smaller but faster, darted through the chaos, cutting into the enemy lines. Mines hidden in drifting debris exploded, tearing apart capital ships with merciless precision. Squadrons of fighters, piloted by men and women with fire in their eyes, plunged headfirst into impossible odds, crippling ships that should have been untouchable. And everywhere, humans fought as though they had nothing left to lose. One alien captain reported with disbelief that a human ship, already burning and broken, rammed itself into the side of his cruiser, detonating its core. The blast consumed both vessels. Another admiral screamed in shock as human boarding parties broke through his flagship's walls. Soldiers charging down corridors with knives and rifles, fighting until their last breath. For every human vessel destroyed, the fleet expected relief, but instead the terror grew, because no matter how many humans fell, more seemed to rise, dragging their enemies into fire with them. Victory did not taste like triumph. It tasted like blood. The turning point came when the great super dreadnought, the pride of the fleet, entered the fray. Its weapons could melt continents. Its shields were said to be unbreakable. The galaxy had believed this single ship could destroy Earth itself. It fired once, carving through human lines, leaving devastation in its wake. But before it could fire again, swarms of human craft hurled themselves at it from every direction. Tiny ships slammed into its shields, overloading them with desperate strikes. Fighters wove through its guns, each one burning in the attempt. Human marines boarded in waves, their screams echoing in the metal halls as they tore through crew after crew. The dreadnought, a symbol of unstoppable power, fell not to superior weapons but to sheer will. It burned until its core cracked open, a dying sun blooming in the dark. The fleet watched in horror as their greatest weapon vanished in silence. Panic spread, orders broke. The perfect formation of the fleet shattered as admirals screamed for retreat, for regrouping, for anything to stop the tide. But the humans did not allow it. They pressed forward with unrelenting fury, dragging the invaders down, one ship at a time. By the end, the void was littered with wreckage. Fires burned in the dark, twisted metal drifting endlessly. The fleet that had once darkened the stars was no more. What survived limped away, broken, bleeding, and haunted. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread. Entire populations stared in disbelief as reports told the truth. The greatest fleet ever assembled had been torn apart by humanity. Not by technology, not by overwhelming strength, but by something deeper, something no empire could match. Whispers became screams. The galaxy understood now that humanity was not simply dangerous, they were unstoppable. If such fury could tear down an armada built from the strength of empires, what hope remained? For the first time, rulers did not speak of victory, they spoke of survival. They wondered if even the vastness of the galaxy could hide them from the wrath of humanity. And so the war turned. The galaxy no longer hunted humans, it feared them. It watched with dread, realizing that every strike against humanity only made them stronger. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. The war had reached its turning point, and the galaxy whispered louder than ever before. Humanity was no longer just a name. Humanity was terror itself. The battlefield was quiet now, but silence did not mean peace. Wreckage drifted like corpses in the void, twisted steel glowing faint red where fires still sputtered fragments of ships. Once mighty symbols of empire floated broken and useless. Among the ruins, faint distress signals pulsed, voices crying out in panic before fading into static. For those who survived, the battle was finished, but for the galaxy, it was only beginning. The stories spread faster than any fleet could travel. Soldiers who escaped the slaughter whispered of humans who did not die when they should have. They told of men and women burned and broken, still clawing forward with weapons in hand. They spoke of eyes shining in the darkness, of war cries echoing, "Across comes," even when the transmitters had been destroyed. Some claimed they saw human soldiers laughing as they bled, smiling as though death itself was just another enemy to be defied. At first, listeners doubted them. It sounded impossible, exaggerated by fear and exhaustion. But the survivors insisted, their voices trembling with something deeper than fear, something closer to horror. They had seen death before. They had seen wars that turned planets into ash, but nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to the savagery of humanity. In barracks across the stars, alien recruits listened to the tales with wide eyes. Commanders tried to silence them, tried to dismiss the stories as weakness. Yet even those commanders carried the same look in their eyes, the look of men and women who had seen something they could never unsee. Discipline cracked, morale broke, and whispers spread through entire armies like disease. "The humans are coming," they said in low voices. "They will never stop." On distant colonies, civilians repeated the stories with growing dread. Mothers hushed their children with tales of human soldiers who could not die, of human fleets that burned brighter than suns. Farmers looked to the skies and wondered if one day they would see the shadows of human ships above their fields. Traders spoke in taverns, their voices low but urgent, saying humanity had become the storm, and no wall in the galaxy could hold it back. One recording leaked from the wreckage of the Great Fleet became infamous. It showed the inside of a shattered cruiser, its halls filled with smoke and blood. Human marines moved through the wreckage, covered in burns and ash, yet still advancing, still fighting. A final image captured one of them turning to the camera. His face was scarred, his armor cracked, but his eyes burned with unshakable fury. His mouth moved, and though the words were faint, the galaxy heard them clearly. "We will never fall." The recording was shared in secret at first, then broadcast openly by those who wanted the truth to be known. Within days, billions had seen it. Within weeks, entire civilizations whispered it as though it were a curse. Even those who had never seen a human before now feared them. The empires that had once spoken of conquest found themselves struggling to hold their own people together. Soldiers deserted rather than face humans. Workers sabotaged fleets meant to invade human space. In markets and stations, the very mention of humanity's name sent shivers down spines. And yet, what terrified the galaxy most was not humanity's weapons, nor their ships, nor even their victories. It was their will. The humans did not fight for empire. They did not fight for conquest. They fought because survival was carved into their bones, because their history had been forged in struggle long before they reached the stars. To fight humanity was not to fight an army, it was to fight a force of nature. Leaders argued in endless councils. Some demanded peace, others demanded annihilation. But the truth gnawed at all of them. Peace was impossible, annihilation was impossible. Humanity could not be bent, and they could not be broken. The more they were struck, the harder they struck back. The more they bled, the stronger they seemed to grow. The galaxy began to live in dread. No fleet was trusted to win. No weapon was believed to be enough. Entire empires stayed awake through the long nights, listening for footsteps that might never come, yet fearing that one day they would. The whispers that had once been dismissed as rumors now became truth, and that truth sank like poison into every world, every station, every soul. A trader once described it best. He sat in a crowded tavern, his voice heavy, his hands shaking. As he recounted what he had seen, "You don't understand," he told them. "Other species fight to win. The humans fight so they will not lose. Do you see the difference? You can break the will of a conqueror. You can starve the ambition of an empire. But how do you break the will of someone who refuses to die? How do you fight an enemy who turns death into a weapon?" The tavern fell silent. No one answered. No one could dot. And so the whispers deepened. No longer just stories. They became warnings. No longer just warnings. They became terror. In every corner of the galaxy, from the most powerful rulers to the lowest citizens, the same truth haunted every thought. Humanity was no longer just another species. They had become legend. They had become the thing that soldiers feared in their dreams, the monster that empires whispered of in the dark. The war had started as a campaign. Now it had become something far greater, something that could not be measured in numbers or fleets. It had become a shadow that stretched across the stars, a shadow with a human face. And in that shadow, the galaxy could only tremble. The war ended, but not in the way the galaxy had imagined. There was no treaty signed, no grand surrender, no parade of victors. What remained instead were ruins, ashes, and silence. The fleets that had once stretched across the stars were gone, broken and drifting. Worlds that had believed themselves untouchable now stared at the scars carved into their skies. The galaxy, vast and ancient, stood shaken in ways it had never known before. And yet, in the center of it all, humanity still stood. Their cities were burned, their armies were torn, their ships were fewer than ever before, but they endured. Where others would have fallen, where others would have bent, humanity refused to be erased. The war had not broken them, it had only carved them into something harder, something sharper, something the galaxy would never forget. Across the stars, survivors whispered of the final battles. They spoke of humans crawling out of craters, their bodies broken but their eyes still alive with fury. They spoke of soldiers who fought with nothing left, who used the bones of the fallen as weapons, who would not lay down even when death closed in. They spoke of fleets that should have shattered but instead turned wreckage into traps, turning defeat into blood-soaked victories. The galaxy listened. In the grand halls of empires, rulers no longer asked how to win. They asked how to survive. They asked what would happen if humanity decided to come for them next. They asked what would become of the stars if a species that fought like demons ever learned to fight with the strength of gods. No answer brought peace. Every question ended in silence. The whispers spread farther until no world, no station, no hidden colony was untouched. "Do not fight the humans," voices warned. "Do not awaken their fury." It was not law, not command, but legend. Children grew up with stories of humans who defied the impossible. Soldiers trained with fear of ever meeting them in battle. Merchants crossed space with prayers never to see human banners rising on the horizon. Humanity had become more than flesh and blood. They had become myth. One alien chronicler, desperate to explain what had happened, wrote in his final entry, "We counted their weapons, and they were few. We measured their fleets, and they were small. We weighed their worlds, and they were weak. But we did not count their will. We did not measure their rage. We did not weigh their hunger to live. And for that mistake, the galaxy now trembles." He was right. The galaxy did not tremble at human numbers or human machines. It trembled at the thought of what lived inside them, that savage, unbroken core that turned even despair into a weapon. In the ruins of war, the humans themselves stood in silence. They did not celebrate. They did not cheer. They buried their dead. They rebuilt their cities. They carried their scars, not as shame but as memory. For them, survival was not a story to tell. It was life itself. But outside their worlds, far beyond their skies, the whispers carried on. The war had left something behind that could not be destroyed. Fear, respect, or humanity's name, became a shadow stretched across every star system, a shadow so deep that even light could not pierce it. And so the galaxy spoke of them in hushed tones. Some called them monsters, some called them demons, others, more cautious, called them survivors. But all agreed on one thing: to fight humanity was to invite terror itself. Generations later, long after the last battle had faded into history, the whispers still lingered. Children of alien worlds still woke from dreams of human eyes watching them from the dark. Soldiers still flinched at tales of human war cries. Rulers still remembered the fleet that had once blotted out the stars, and how it had been torn apart not by numbers, but by the fury of a single species that refused to die. It was not only history now, it was legend. The kind of story that survives empires, survives centuries, survives even the truth. The war had been so savage that time itself could not erase it, and as long as the galaxy turned, as long as stars still burned, the name of humanity would echo, for, in the end, humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The strongest empire can fall, the greatest fleet can burn, the proudest race can kneel. But the will to survive, the fire to fight against all odds, cannot be broken, and so the galaxy whispered, over and over, the same final truth. The war was so savage, the galaxy whispers humanity's name in terror,